Greetings, astronauts, and welcome back to Astro Candy. Hi, I'm Raven, your host, and I'm so excited to share with you today this conversation with my friend Eden, all about the process of surrender and ego death and rebirth. This conversation came about because I was going to interview Eden about something else. I did. We did the entire interview, but I was listening back on the editing room floor and was like, no, this 35 minutes has to be its own episode because it's so profound, talking about the energetics of what we've all experienced at some point in our life where we're trying so hard, we're working so hard, we're doing everything that we can to make something happen, but it's just not working. And you get to this point where you have to surrender. And that surrender brings about ego death, which eventually leads to an epic rebirth, but the process is treacherous. So in this episode, Eden and I talk about her tough decision to close her spiritual coaching business and go back out into the workforce. We discuss the creative evolution that she experienced on her personal transformation journey, and she also shares what to do if you're met with resistance or feel stuck despite taking aligned action. We talk about unsubscribing from the outcome, which requires both dissolution and surrendering to the process, which is very different than giving up. We actually discuss the difference between giving up and surrendering and this metaphorical eclipse that happens when we surrender and the grief that comes with it. Eden introduces Carl Jung's philosophy of holding the tension of the opposites so that you become comfortable in the in-between. I think that's why a lot of us don't make tough decisions, because we know that once we do, we'll be in this weird space where we don't know what we're doing. And she explains why you don't need clarity to move forward. We discuss the ego, how it can distort people's perception of you on an energetic plane, and how to cope when you're experiencing an ego death, which is inevitable when you surrender. We talk about the subtle energetic shift that occurs when you start making decisions from your authentic self instead of from your ego, how to tell which is which. And Eden shares the importance of feeling safe and supported in order to thrive creatively. And she explains why sometimes you have to take a detour in order to reach the destination on the path toward your dreams. This is such a powerful, empowering conversation, so much so that, mind you, this was just the first half of our interview. We were supposed to talk about something totally different, but I was like, no, this has to be its own episode. So that's what you'll hear today. At a later date during Taurus season, we'll talk about if you want to up your style game, how to embrace your authentic self and express yourself through your style, and Eden's tips and tricks and her process and journey. But this right here is all about surrender, ego death, and rebirth. And I really hope that you enjoy it. And if you do, I would love it if you would rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or just send this episode to a friend. All right, enjoy our conversation. Eden, welcome back to the Astro Candy podcast. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is the only podcast I've ever been on 3 times.
3 times a charm. I'm happy to be your first. I am actually really happy to have this interview with you because you were talking about your own podcast hiatus. So this feels like an exclusive interview with the Eden Garcia Thaler.
It really does. I feel like I'm breaking my silence of like podcasting and everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we need to
hopefully
talk
it'll
about
have some
that.
mystique around it and we can just milk this.
Yeah. Well, that is something I want to talk about because I feel like you've had such a transformation from when we first met until now. So for anybody listening and you haven't heard my conversations with Eden on the show, go back and listen. I'll link those in the show notes. But Eden and I met in this wonderful place called Philadelphia.
Both of our favorite place.
Thick with sarcasm, that sentiment is. We actually bonded because we both hated Philly so much in this way that was like, I could see the life force being drained out of you, and you could see the life force being drained out of me. And we were both like, oh my God, let's save each other.
Literally, I remember you grabbing my arm to this day. It's so vivid with pain in your eyes. Just being like, I hate it here too.
Oh my
And
God,
then
I just
from there, it was just love at
yes.
first sight.
It really was. It really was. Yeah, we have quite the journey and not just our friendship, but also you as a person. And my cat is biting me, so I'm gonna let her out of this closet studio. So when I first met you though, you were doing something totally different. You were in the spiritual coaching space. Can you talk a little bit about that and that business and where you were at that time of your life?
Yeah. So when we first met, I think I was a couple years into it at that point and supporting people through a process that I like to call it the inner alchemy of transforming your unprocessed emotions and your unhealed childhood wounds. That's kind of my forte, and it's still like a big part of who I am and something I'm extremely passionate about, and still in a space where I think that will always take a form. But yeah, so I was in that space. I had a podcast that the podcast is still live, Field Notes from the Spiritual Journey. We might have a comeback at some point. So yeah, I was working with people one-on-one and podcasting and sharing a lot of content all about that process of personal transformation, which our first episode is about. It's all about shadow work, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I was thick in it. Manifestation, shadow work, those were my main
TBM.
focuses. Yeah, TBM. I feel like my podcast, it was literally just like a brand deal ongoing with TBM.
An unpaid partnership.
Yeah, fully unpaid. Shout out TBM. We also met through a TBM
Mm,
meetup group. So we'll always
yeah.
be grateful to TBM for that. Yeah. And then as the time went on, just I think there's a natural creative evolution that people go through, especially people who are really in tune with their personal transformational journey. And things might not always look the same. And, sometimes you have to move on from things, and we can absolutely talk about that more. But I just hit that point where honestly, I mean, bringing in TBM energetics, if you're familiar, like they talk about rut and rock bottom energetics, where it just feels like, okay, nothing is moving, nothing is happening. You think you're doing all the right things, and it's just like one thing after another. And it was so much of that place energetically for me. And I resisted it for so long of letting go of that kind of business formation and just that way of like presenting myself in the world. And finally, I surrendered it. So yeah, so I fully just let go of being a part of the spiritual coaching paradigm, which was so necessary for me, and immediately felt my life force come back into my body. Um, and I've just been kind of riding the wave since then.
I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth because I've been there before when you're doing something and you've been doing it and then you just hit this wall energetically, physically, emotionally. Can you describe that wall you were coming up against and why? Like if you had to go back and think about like why you were hitting a wall in your business, which based on your story, and I know we've talked about this in a previous episode about shadow work and, your journey and how you studied in India and all this stuff, it seemed like your path for all intents and purposes, like everything seemed like you were one foot in front of the other. This is what I'm going to do. And this is my business. And this. So talk about the period of time where you just started feeling that resistance and like, wait a second, this isn't working anymore. And not only that, but I want to stop making it, like trying to make it work.
Mm. Oh my God, so many things. Yes, and I just want to say it was my path and it's still my path. I would be shocked if whether it's 1 year from now, 5 years from now, however long, like my path does not resemble something, including all those things. I feel like as far as the creative process of like death and rebirth that people go through, I'm still kind of in like a dissolution. I feel the energy. There was like a big dissolution and me having to really like submit to just the unconscious and where my creative energy and TBM, they call it pings, your intuition is just guiding you without any real full picture of where it's going or a clear outcome in mind. I feel like I'm still kind of in that right now. So I would be shocked if somehow something doesn't take form again because those things are, my path. And I will say that that's why it was so confusing for me to be able to identify that this was not in alignment and like being such a TBM like fangirl and religious TBM person, I just remember being so confused because it's like, this is a line and is this authentic to your soul? And are you taking all the action? I was like, literally everything. It was it. So I think that where I came up against that was really the coaching world is not for me. I think that where you asked about that feeling of why are we sometimes we think everything's so aligned, or we're in a career or job or relationship or environment, and we like why does it become this stuckness that something's not right? And I think the simple answer to that, in my opinion, my personal experience, is there's some attachment to outcome that is not actually what's best for our soul's evolution, that our conscious mind is not willing to let go of. And I think for me, that attachment was I wanted things to have an outcome by the standards of the coaching industry and the spiritual coaching paradigm, as I like to call it, that was not coming from a true place of my true authentic self. Everything was as far as the substance of what I was doing and the relationships that I was having with my clients. But as far as this little part of me that really wanted this superficial, check mark in Instagram followers, or, quantum money energetics, or whatever it might be. And yeah, that's the part that was really not authentic to me, that I just ultimately had to unsubscribe from that entire way of looking at reality, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And that's a really good point that you make is we can be on the aligned path, but trying to fit, for lack of a better phrase, a square peg into a round hole. The modality in which we're using to achieve, not achieve, I hate the word achieve, but like to follow this aligned path might be the wrong one. It's like if you're trying to get from here to Dublin, Ireland, and you want to take a car. You
Exactly.
can't. You need a
Yes.
boat. Like it's all about the vehicle in which you're getting, in which you're moving along on
Hmm.
your aligned path. So that's a really good distinction, I think. Because
Yeah,
some people might throw the whole journey away. Like they might be like,
totally.
oh, well, then this whole space with spirituality and manifestation, and I know these are near and dear to my heart, but I guess it's not working. So I'm just going to go be a dentist. Or, you know
Totally.
what I mean? Like, I think a lot of people do that more often than we realize because they're coming up against resistance. And in the spirituality space, people say resistance, like it shouldn't feel like swimming uphill. Swimming uphill. Swimming uphill? Is that the right? Swimming upstream.
There you go.
We got there. It shouldn't feel like swimming upstream, but nothing is inherently easy. Like
No.
I don't ever want to sit here and be like, "Oh, well, if it's in alignment, it's going to come with ease." And no, if it's in alignment, like there's probably going to be a good amount of like shadow work you're going to have to do, a good amount of like ego shedding you're going to have to do, pivoting you're going to have to do. And I feel like that's what you're in process of is letting go of that vehicle, as we've been saying in coaching, and realizing, oh, this was feeding my ego or this was whatever. And now you're at this spot where things are coming together a little more naturally because you're letting them, you're not like determined to be on this one path. Like you're kind of
Yes.
leaving it open to the universe to figure out. Would you agree?
I would agree. There's two to three things I wanted to say. One is another great metaphor that I think can be used for this vehicle idea. I heard on this Jungian Life podcast, one of the hosts used, and it was the idea of finding the stage that you want to do that thing on,
Mm,
because it's the same, skills. You might know what your skills are, or something you enjoy doing, or whatever your passion might be. But what is the stage? Maybe you only have seen certain people in certain careers or vocations, so you think that's the only stage. If you're a performer, you like to talk, you might think, oh, I have to be a radio host if that's the only thing you've ever seen. But maybe that's not actually the stage you want to do it on. And so I love that. I just wanted to throw that in there because I think that's really helpful. And I think, we only know what we know and what we've seen. And sometimes it can be hard to have that clarity or know what's for you until you've seen it. Sometimes I felt in both the spiritual coaching paradigm and kind of the spiritual paradigm at large is it doesn't always make room for, like you're saying, it can be really hard. I think that we tend to sometimes in the spiritual community err on the side of like, if it's not feeling great, it's not, it's not right. Or if it's not your bliss, like if it's not ease, if it's not all these things. And I think it doesn't always leave room for, or maybe emphasize how hard things can be and like need to be in life sometimes. Like it does take effort and work. And part of that, not only hard, but also uncomfortable process of being a human and figuring out who you are as a human and a soul and bringing that forward in your life is dissolution and surrendering.
Mm.
And I think yes, to is a short answer to your question. I had to take a huge step back as far as the level that I was gripping the outcome that I wanted to see and like just using manifestation. And I've done this so many times in my life, so it's just kind of funny to me now, but just Matt Kahn, a spiritual teacher, talks about it as the spiritual ego, but just constructing a whole new ego that's just like, I'm going to be the best manifester. I'm going to be the most enlightened person. I'm going to whatever it is. And that state of truly letting go of the outcome, like no, I feel like no one likes to talk about. It's messy and like it's scary, and you're not going to have a finished product. You're not going to just go through a quick dark night of the soul and then be back on Instagram 2 weeks later selling your next
Yeah.
course. Like, no, it's like you fully have to let your life sometimes fall apart, and it's extremely humbling, and it's extremely takes, it's brings a lot of humility to the ego, which I think is, important sometimes. And in that space, yes, I think things can start to flow. And, I'm right now in my life, I'm leaving, trying to, because every day it's a battle, but leaving a little more room for there
Yeah.
to be this like relationship with the universe, God, whatever, this current of life that's not just like my ego trying to like achieve its own means.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've been grappling with in my own spiritual journey, and just it's the topic of a lot of my journal prompts right now, is what is the difference between giving up and surrendering? That is the biggest question I've asked myself. And I can use my logical mind and tell you the answer. When you give up, you're basically resolving that this is not a possibility for me anymore. Like we're putting a pin in that and we're not revisiting. Whereas surrender is, I'm okay with or without this thing. I would like to have it and trust that it will manifest, but I'm not going to grip it so tightly that I suffocate it. That being said, energetically, it is so hard to surrender, which is essentially what you described. Like it's just scary as fuck because it does feel like giving up. There is a level of you being like, well, if I'm not wanting for this thing incessantly, what if the universe, what if God then doesn't give it to me? And then I'm just resolving that it's never going to happen. And I am like grieving that it's never going to happen. We get ahead of ourselves in our human minds. So, can you talk about that experience of resolving that you're going to surrender without grieving it like you're giving up?
Oh, yes. I think there's big surrenders in life and little surrenders, and I'll try and touch on both in my personal experience. But I think in big surrenders, I think it does feel like grieving. At least it does to me. Because when you're really turning over something that you've been holding on to tightly and maybe unknowingly as a source of identity, you've been drawing your identity, maybe your worth, or maybe even hiding behind that thing. I think in turning that thing over or letting it go, there is a grieving of, wow, like this, I'm letting go of who I thought I was, or, for me in the coaching business, I just want to like be fully, share fully honestly, like there was this feeling of sunk costs. Like I put so much energy. I've spent the last 3 years like identifying with this, working on that. This has been my whole identity. And for it to now to be confronted with letting this go, it's like, wow, I never like I'm not going to get that back. I'm not going to, and we know that in the universe, like that experience will have some intelligence or meaning that I'm sure will of course go into the next thing. But in that moment, it feels like I have nothing. And I think that that moment of I have nothing, full darkness, eclipse, there for one brief moment, you can't see the sun, I think is actually an important part of the process of surrendering, because that's
Mm.
also the part where, the trust and the faith comes in, like as cliche as that is. And I think that also in the smaller moments of surrender in our lives, there's this idea from Carl Jung, who was, the founder of Jungian depth analytical psychology. And he talked about, how I understand this as holding the tension of the opposites, which can mean that, okay, I want this thing and it's not here yet. Or maybe I know I want something, but I don't know what it is. Is it this or is it that? And I don't know. And to be able to hold that tension is like this place of building this strength, to sit in this discomfort. And I think that that can be like a little doorway into surrender, because in that moment, you're acknowledging there's things at work here. There's a churning of energy in my life where I know that I'm moving towards something, but I don't have clarity. And I can hold some ideas, but still not be sure. And I think that that opens the door into surrender and allowing this greater intelligence than our limited consciousness into the field to feel like, okay, I'm not alone, or at least like, even if it's not to a higher power, it's like time is on my side. Like time will help this unfold.
Two things. I don't know if you meant to do this, but I find it funny that you mentioned the eclipse symbolism there. And
I
we're,
did mean it.
oh, okay. I was about to say, like, that was weird. But of course, you threw that in there on purpose. As of recording, we're between the two eclipses right now. But good point you make about how you don't have to have full clarity to move forward. You don't have to have full clarity to, like, you don't have to have a vision of the final destination in order to take that next step forward, or in order to like put the gas in the car and get in the car and, just turn the dial to a station you're gonna want to listen to on this car ride and like get as prepared, I guess, as you can. This is just, all of this is so good. I know we need to move a little bit faster because we still have so much more to talk about. So, really quick, we've been on point A and we're going to get to point B, but there's a little murky middle I want to clear up. You've wonderfully explained this feeling of surrender, pivoting, being terrified of what's coming next, all energetically. What did you do physically in this real world from the time you not quit, from the time you closed up shop on your coaching business to now? What were you working on? What job did you get? How did you make that transition in the physical 3D world? Because I feel like we covered it for the spiritual aspect.
Yeah, I would love to share about that. Yeah, so I closed up shop. I like phased out, there's a number of months of phasing everything out. And I got a job right away. I got a job working as the administrative associate in a family chiropractic office, which was talk about manifesting. I was trying to manifest everything so hard throughout my whole coaching business. And like that job, quote unquote, manifested in like one day, which then I'm not doing that anymore. That led into me doing social media management for a couple different businesses. So that's what I'm doing now. And yeah, that's it. I mean, it was so humbling. And I think so many of us like spiritual girlies who were always just like, I'm never getting a job. Like that for me,
Yeah.
it was such a narrative in my life. Like, I always was in part-time gigs before I had my coaching business, or teaching yoga or teaching meditation or doing something, holding gatherings. Like I was just always in that quote unquote spiritual field, if there is such a thing, which now there totally is. And so, yeah, I was like, I have to get a job, I have to just go
Hmm.
out there, figure out what I'm going to do. And luckily it's come together, but the last year has pretty much been sorting things out on that side of things.
Well, I'm so proud of you because that is so hard to do. Any type of career pivot. I mean, I have spoken many times on this podcast about my own career pivot because my identity, like we've talked about, an ego was so wrapped up in this one thing that I've done for the last 10 years. And so a pivot is so fucking hard. So I commend you for that. The ego deaths, no one prepares you for how tough it is. No one prepares you for the questions that people ask, well-meaning questions. Oh, well, why would you quit that if you liked it? So like they're all so well-intended, but you're just like, please, it's a touchy topic. But I say this to say that if you want to know more about career pivots and how to navigate them, listen to the episode that I did with my career coach. I'll link it in the show notes. Here's the magic in all of this. In hearing your story, you're pivoting, you're kind of just like going with the flow and seeing what the universe presents to you. And I think that's kind of an empowering place to be because you have no skin in the game. Like the way I see it is I've hit rock bottom. So no move is a wrong move. Like, let's just see where things go. It's a level of like, what's that called when you're just completely just like unfucking bothered now? Like
Yeah.
it's so nice. It's so empowering. But what I
Hmm.
noticed is you were increasingly active on TikTok. I had followed you ever since I knew you. And when you were having your coaching business, and I would see the types of content that you post. But to me, there was a very distinct difference in your content and in your posting and in your style and the way that you presented yourself. And I think I remember back when I still lived in Philly, I think you were at this point where you're like, and you tell me, I think you were like, I'm tired of putting things out there with the expectation that they're just going to blow up. So I'm just going to like start doing things that I want to do. Was that your mindset going into it?
With TikTok,
Yeah.
TikTok was like, I honestly can't even remember. Like some of it just came up. It's like literally 1 year since I kind of started posting on there. And yeah, I honestly, if you remember that conversation, I believe you. I don't remember that, but I do remember it was such an ego death. It was such an ego death. Like I thought I was like cool, like so cool within the spiritual like paradigm at least. Like I felt like, like I'm kind of cool. Like I'm kind of good at this, like whatever. I'm pretty smart. Like I don't know. And so yeah, but I was posting things all through the lens of like this is through a lens of trying to have a coaching business. And of course it was very authentic. I think if you were paying attention a lot, at least I get that impression that people felt that way a lot. And it was authentic, but like there's always that tone of like, would I be doing this if there was literally no external motivation? Would I be showing up on Instagram this way? And I just started to think about all those things. Like, if I had nothing to gain and money wasn't real and jobs weren't real, like, would I be creating this content? And I was kind of just like, no, like some of it, I was
Ooh.
just like, no, I wouldn't. And, maybe I would be having those conversations with people. Sure. I wrote a couple of Substack posts because I felt super called, so that would be coming out of me in some form, but not like this. And I got the ick from Instagram. I got the ick from myself, really, on Instagram, just because I was seeing so clearly, like just, and it's hints. I'm not trying to be black and white and say like everything I did was not authentic at all. It was totally authentic to me at the time. And there were little threads of just programmings or ideas from the coaching paradigm that had kind of gone into me, and so that I was just needing to clear out. But in this time, I love creating content if no one's noticed. And so I always had a TikTok, but following those threads of inspiration, I started just blindly following what lights me up. And the only thing that was lighting me up was style and fashion, which has always been a huge, I guess, side passion of mine. I used to have an Etsy store. I used to resell vintage clothes. I used to custom make like denim shorts in like 2011. And my mom has had a huge Etsy store and she grew up taking me to thrift shops. Like it's just always been a part of my life. And so I was just like little things were happening. I ran into this woman at a New Year's party and she was telling me about the idea of seasonal color palettes. And it was just like I was obsessed and I just fell into this rabbit hole and I started sharing about it on TikTok about my style journey because I was just like, this is what's lighting me up and this is just fun. Like literally there was absolutely no intention to it.
So I want to highlight something that you said that I think is really important for anybody who is creating content and posting or just showing up in the world in general, which you said that if money wasn't a thing, if validation wasn't a thing, if followers weren't a thing, would I be posting what I'm posting? Would I be posting how I'm posting? Would I be presenting myself the way I'm presenting myself if money, followers, fame, whatever is an ego driver wasn't a thing? And that is a really important distinction because I think that when we are driven by those aspects, we inherently operate differently. I show up in a different way on social media when it's for something. Take my radio days. There was a different way I showed up on social media when it was just me talking to my audience about whatever the fuck I felt like versus when, say, an advertiser for movie tickets had us posting about this movie. The way I presented myself and interacted with my followers was so much different. And that's just a really small example. Now use it toward your own journey or really your own business or whatever on social media. Like, ask yourself, would I be posting about this kind of stuff if I wasn't trying to get this hit of followers, if I wasn't trying to get this hit of validation? And I'm just pointing this out because once you started forgetting all of that and you really followed what lit you up, which maybe didn't make any sense at the time, like Eden, you were just doing spiritual business coaching, you're in that space. Why the hell would you start posting about fashion, right? Like our logical mind is like, why would I do that? That's so weird. It's not my brand. It's not, but you were just like, you know what? This is fun. I like it. I have things to share or just things to kind of like gab about that I'm interested in. Maybe somebody else will be too. And that's where I feel like that difference alone, that subtle but very important energetic shift is what made you so magnetic. Like I saw multiple videos that you were doing blow up, people commenting, people loving your content. And what's crazy is like, what's crazy, that's not the right word, but like what's also speaks to it is just how authentically, not saying you weren't before, but just like how casual, how there was no distinction between me talking to you on the phone and you talking to all of these followers on Instagram, which is huge because again, we tend to present ourselves in a way, especially like from the ego, if we're trying to get something out of it. But you weren't, you're just showing up as yourself. I'll let you to respond to that before I throw more questions at your way. It's the questions
Okay.
your way.
I just want to highlight or all over what you said about that subtle energetic shift being everything. I just want to speak to the person for a second who's like, everything looks right on the surface, or this what I'm doing aligns with all of my interests, or maybe the relationship is like everything I would want on paper, and yet there's this subtle energetic shift that's like, for me in my business, it was, yeah, all the interests check. Clients love them. The people's just everything about it, like on paper, getting to show up, create content, all these things that I love. And yet, for me, I think the energetic shift, that the source of the energetic misalignment was I did not have backup stable funds. I did not have financial security coming from another source. So, because of that, this fear was able to penetrate that arena. And it's just like you're saying, it's like, it's so subtle. I could have made the argument to myself and to anyone that, yes, I'd be showing up the exact same way. These are messages I feel from the heart. These are spiritual truths that are so true to me. All that was true. And because of this, it was tainted. Like this fear I was bringing in where I didn't feel spacious. And so I think that's just a really practical tip for people. Like, you can't thrive that way creatively. And that is such an obvious piece of practical advice. People would say, like, don't put the pressure on your business, have another income, like have another job, let things grow organically. And it's just, it's true. It's true from an energetic standpoint of keeping the channel flowing. Also, because when you're being a spiritual person and having a business, like things are going to flow and evolve, and it also takes a long time to sort of sift out what exactly you're doing, what exactly you love, and you need that space. And so it's just, even though time and time again I would always get by, I would always be fine, and so I had the justification to be like, oh no, it's fine, I'm just going to keep going and eventually it'll get better and then this won't be an issue. But it was like, no, you, despite all of that, and it was honestly heartbreaking. I know I'm going back to the coaching story here for a second, but it was so heartbreaking because I received this download that was like, this is going to be really hard to put something I care so much about and I know that I want to do one day in a different way on pause. Like I'm going to have to fully withdraw my energy from this thing that is my passion in order to go walk my feet to a job interview and like take care of some shit on the 3D plane. And like this is going to really take all the energy away from this. But I have to turn away from this and go this other direction for a little bit to like put in place things that are going to enable me to show up in a totally clear energy in the future. So I just think that was so important for me and why I was gaslighting myself for so long, because everything on paper was exactly what I wanted and everything that I was doing, I was interested in and all those things. But it's like, it doesn't matter if you're not calm in your life. So I wanted to say that. And then, yeah, just what would you be doing if no one was listening? And it's amazing how that subtle shift, that subtle change, like can change everything. And it's a way of showing up. And when you're communicating with people or showing up online or creating content and you have that any subtle distortions in the field, like you don't even realize how it's shifting the way you're showing up and how that's landing with people. And it's not, I don't think it's a one-to-one, like, oh, if you're worried about money, you're going to be showing up in a like graspy, fear, salesy way. That's not what I mean. I just mean it's distorting you. It's distorting your voice, what you're actually going to be sharing about, just your vibe. And so, and you can't even see those things while you're in it. It's not till you step away that you can kind of come back clearer.
And they're all subtleties that people can, on the subconscious level, pick up on. Like that's where I think so many people don't understand. It's because we are describing a phenomena that you cannot see, but it's very much real. Like we are here on this energetic plane. I am energy, you are energy, this desk is energy, this phone, everything is energy. So when our energy shifts, for whatever reason, other people can subconsciously, energetically feel it. And so they might not be drawn to you in a way. They might not hear what you have to say because of that. So, like, I think of it as like, almost like a really high pitch, like on in the background, just you can't clearly pick up on what someone is telling you if that's coming from them, this subtle high pitched sound. And you're like, you're just confused and you're just like, I don't know, whatever, scroll. Like, I don't
Such a good metaphor.
That's the best. Isn't it? I was just about to say, I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but well, Eden, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, taking your time. How can people connect with you? Where can they find you? Social media, TikTok, email, your website, where can they look?
Yeah, it's Eden Garcia Thaler on TikTok and Instagram. And you can email me if you want or just send me a DM maybe. Yeah. Those are the main places right now.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you again, Eden. I appreciate you and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
I have goosebumps just listening to that back. Such a wonderful conversation with Eden. Thank you again to her for being on the Astro Candy podcast and sharing her wisdom and insights. I'm not kidding when I tell you 1 year ago today, she and I were on completely different trajectories. We were at the lowest of lows and we were sort of confronted and faced with this new, I don't want to say a new path, but like a detour on our path to our final destination, to our dreams. And that can be really scary. It can be really scary to surrender because your ego dies. It just does. And our ego, it makes us feel safe. It makes us feel like we know who we are. So when you're in that in between and you're like, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I'm doing, it's a lot to go through. But the rebirth on the other side is so incredible and wonderful and fantastic and so fucking worth it. So I hope you enjoyed that episode and the takeaways. And if you're going through it like we were, like some of us still are, just to know that you're not alone and to continue forward. Even if you don't have clarity moving forward, you can always take that next right step. So again, thank you to Eden. All of her information is linked in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy that you're here today. If you like this episode, I would love it if you would rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or send this episode to a friend. Now, usually I would say see you next week, but you'll actually see me tomorrow because I'm dropping the stargazing episode for Taurus season. So See you then. All right. Bye.